Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for a conversation around the climate investments in the California Blueprint, Governor Gavin Newsom's May Revise proposal. My name is Andrea Ambrose, and I'm the Deputy Secretary of External Affairs at the California Natural Resources Agency. Today, we're joined by Secretary Crowfoot and directors across our agency to provide more detail around the investments that were proposed in the Governor's May Revise on Friday. Today's briefing will be recorded and available on our website at the end of the day. We'll also share a few links in the chat during our discussion, all which you can find on our website. And we'll also be collecting questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Additionally, we have live transcripts as well as interpretation. Here are instructions for interpretation in Spanish. And I'm going to turn it over to our translator, Lydia, for instructions for those Spanish speakers wishing to use the translation function. Lydia. Thank you, Lydia. And with that, I would like to introduce and welcome the Secretary of the California Natural Resources Agency, Wade Crowfoot.
Well, thanks so much, Andrea. And I think for those who might not be able to hear when the interpreter went on, if they should just go down to the interpretation button and push English. That's what I was able to do to hear the commentary. But in any event, welcome everybody. We were very excited with Governor Newsom's shared announcement regarding the May revision of his proposed budget. You may know that every January, our state's governor proposes a budget for the coming fiscal year that starts in July. And then in May, the governor proposes or updates that budget with what we call a May revision that reflects how the revenues and the taxes have come in the budget, and that really allows the governor to refine the budget that he's proposing to the legislature. And the governor did that this past Friday. And we followed up with some deeper dives in the areas of climate, energy, and water. And today we wanted to focus on the entities that make up our agency at the Natural Resources Agency. We'll spend about half the time highlighting budgets from our 7 largest departments in the agency. We're comprised of over 25 entities across our agency. 7 of our departments comprise the lion's share of both our workforce and our budget. And we're blessed to have their leadership working on all of our priorities. And they're here today to highlight a few of the things that in the May revised budget, and then importantly, to answer questions that you have. So there is a Q&A function, as Andrea mentioned, at the bottom of your screen. If you have specific questions for our department directors and myself, please put them in the Q&A. And our goal is to allow for a significant amount of time to answer those questions here today. Now, look, if you follow the Natural Resources Agency, you know historically, we've been disproportionately reliant on general obligation bonds. Those are these GO bonds that voters approve on the ballot. The great news of the state's fiscal health in the last couple of years is a significant amount of one-time general fund surplus. And so as a result of that, our agency has received significant funding from the legislature and the governor last year to advance our shared priorities. And then this year, the governor proposes to have a significant amount of one-time funding into our agency for these priorities. It's notable that the governor announced a surplus in our state budget of $97.5 billion, the largest ever in our state's history. He proposes that 99% of that funding be spent on one-time needs, recognizing we don't essentially want to become reliant on a surplus that may not be there next year. our agency budget is about $15.8 billion as of the governor's proposed May revise. About $9 billion of that is general fund. So the agency has really benefited from this significant surplus of general fund. And the governor's proposal, which will now be discussed by the legislature, reflects that. I want to highlight one important priority for us at the agency, and that is strengthening tribal partnerships. My colleague, Geneva E.B. Thompson, is our first Assistant Secretary for Tribal Affairs, and she's actually on a plane right now, or she'd be sharing this herself. But I wanted to let you know that the governor has proposed $100 million for the tribal nature-based solutions effort. This would be focused on transferring funds to tribal governments, both tribal governments recognized by the federal government and those tribal communities not recognized, to advance our work conserving and restoring nature. And we're really excited about that. That's a first. Along with that, on Friday, the governor released budget language that proposes to establish our first ever Tribal Natural Resources Council, where we would have tribal leaders from across the state advising our agency on how to build our partnerships with tribes and largely shape how that $100 million, if it's approved, gets used. So I'm really excited about that. And this is one of the many highlights we'll talk about here today. Thanks once again for tuning in. And I have the pleasure of introducing our leader at the Department of Water Resources, Carla Namath.
Hi, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. We've got a pretty full agenda, so I'm going to go relatively quickly to give you a thumbnail of the funding for managing our water resources. It's really all about climate readiness of our water supplies for people and the environment and the economy here in California. So starting with what's happening with our hydrology, there is new dollars in the May revise to support forecast-informed reservoir operations, importantly building on Governor Newsom's investments in the January 10 budget on just overall better forecasting and understanding what climate's effect will be on the water we will have available to us for so many needs. The budget also includes funding to support our urban water agencies and small water agencies on drought resilience projects, additional dollars for those entities that have helped support Californians during the drought, as well as additional dollars for groundwater sustainability agencies to get water recharge projects up and running when it does rain again. Importantly, the department also has dollars to support water hauling for some of our most vulnerable communities. This is really a demonstration of how closely DWR is working with our colleagues at the Water Board in supporting these communities that really suffer during drought. A couple of additional highlights are programs to support the Pacific Flyway during drought. That's getting funding into our rice growers to help them make planting decisions that can support the Pacific Flyway. There's also funding that can support fallowing, particularly in the Central Valley, when we know that there's some agricultural practices in the valley drawing on groundwater basins that can create harm to domestic and community well supplies. And then there's significant new funding for aquatic and habitat restoration for the Department of Water Resources. So think things like larger scale habitat restoration that can help support our salmon species. And I know Director Chuck Bonham will say quite a bit more about the work that we'll be doing together on this front during the drought. And then lastly, before I turn it over to our California Energy Commission President, David Hoffchild, the Department of Water Resources May revise budget includes about $30 million for additional pilot projects to put solar panels over canals. That's something that we have been testing out with Turlock Irrigation District. We think there's more opportunities here in California, so there are dollars in the budget for DWR to do that. And with that, I will turn it over to David Hoffchild of the California Energy Commission. David.
Well, thank you so much, Carla, and thank you, Secretary Crowfoot, for the incredible leadership. Let me just first start off by saying I'm a native California. I'm 50 years old. In my lifetime, this is the biggest, boldest budget in my life for climate and clean energy solutions, and I'm incredibly proud to be a part of the team helping to implement it. At the Energy Commission, the new May revised funds added to what was introduced by the governor in January put us at $6.2 billion for the year. And we're going to be focused on things like scaling zero emission vehicles, where we're making historic investments in electric vehicle charging, as well as things like Lithium Valley, where we're lifting up a new sustainable lithium recovery industry in California and associated industries like battery manufacturing. We're also pressing forward on some new technologies, including direct air carbon capture, which is a standalone technology that sucks CO2 out of the atmosphere and can mineralize it into rock. And we're working on a couple areas related to that. And we're also pushing offshore wind. We have some money in the budget to help the offshore wind industry get going in California. And we're going to be doing the first lease sale for 2 areas of offshore wind off the central and the north coast later this year in the fall. And then Secretary Crowfoot, you mentioned the tribal participation. Supporting tribal energy sovereignty is a top priority for me as chair and for our commission. And so we're going to be continuing to invest in that. We've funded 7 tribal energy microgrids so far around the state, and we'll continue to be partnering with tribes to help build out clean energy sovereignty going forward. And then in closing, I would just say, I think one of the most significant investments that we're making is around transportation electrification, which can actually have real benefits for grid reliability as we move to vehicle to grid charging. And together with the Air Resources Board, when you combine last year's budget and this year's budget, we're doing $10 billion for zero emission vehicles, which is incredible. In a normal year, we do something closer to $250 million as a state. So really a landmark achievement. And we're going upstream, really trying to get these manufacturers, both of the vehicles and the batteries, to locate in California and scale in California. We have 43 electric vehicle manufacturers in the state today, manufacturing about 1,500 electric vehicles a day. And we're now pushing to do battery manufacturing in state as well. So huge opportunity with this budget, and really excited to partner with all of you to help make it happen. With that, I'll pass it off to my colleague, Joe Tyler from CAL FIRE.
And good afternoon. Thank you, sir. And thank you, Secretary Crowfoot, for putting this together so we could present important items and investments as in part of the May revision package, specifically for CAL FIRE. As we all know, the conditions driven by climate change and forest health have really impacted the wildfires in California, leading to a longer and more prolonged fire season. And these investments that we'll talk about today, specifically in 3 different buckets, really show a commitment building upon the January proposed budget to be able to ensure that we are investing in protecting the state of California, while at the same time taking advantage of opportunities in the realm of fire prevention. So as we continue to move forward, enhancing CAL FIRE's surge capacity, typically the resources assigned to CAL FIRE over the year begin a process typically and historically to begin downstaffing those resources near the end of October. This commitment will keep all of our resources staffed through the end of December to be able to provide the full realm of peak staffing across California. It's about $83 million of one-time funds to keep those resources staffed through the end of December to address fire severity and the size and declining camp population that we've had there. And it will move to support 16 additional fire crews, hand crews across the state, provide support to our California Military Department partners, as well as expanding our training capacity to be able to get firefighters and company officers that have been approved in the proposed budget and the May revise into the field and working as quickly as possible. The second bucket is really $150 million and is working closely with our partners at the California Conservation Corps and the California Military Department. That includes 270 positions over 4 years to provide additional staffing with 8 new year-round California Conservation Corps and California Military Department crews for each there, and then converting 16 existing seasonal CCC and military department crews to be available to us year round. And the important portion of this is to ensure that those crews are available to be able to continue that critical fire prevention work, prescribed fire work as we get into the fall months, but then additionally to be able to respond to emergencies that occur across the state and have that hand crew availability. Equally important is a investment in direct mission support. It's about $37 million and 190 positions specifically to be able to provide support to the firefighters on the ground, to get those firefighters that are doing administrative support functions into the field where they need to be. It improves operational effectiveness and provides that critical support that we need across the department to be able to continue moving forward and invest in the great work. In addition to that, emergency surge capacity builds upon and above the January proposal, which provides 34 positions to invest in the staffing of the proposed S-70I Black Hawk helicopters, as well as staffing the 10 exclusive use helitankers for the next 3 years while we're waiting for the C-130s to arrive. That investment in exclusive use helicopters of those 10 add to the existing budget of 10 exclusive use helicopters that we have now, bringing us to a total of 20 exclusive use helicopters on top of our 10 CAL FIRE helicopters that we fly on a regular basis. And most importantly, as it came out in the January proposed budget, the administration and Governor Newsom are invested in the health and wellness of our firefighters and ensuring that their long durations on the fire line of 20, 30, 40, 50 days is being recognized. So supporting our California firefighters continues to be an important investment, and we will continue to work closely with Cal HR and the labor organizations, working with the administration to engage in opportunities moving forward to improve those conditions. With that, I am happy to introduce Director Chuck Bonham, representing the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Chuck.
Thanks, Joe. And everyone, I'd be glad to talk about our department's big ticket items in the question and answer session. And there are plenty of those in the water space for salmon, in the nature-based solution space for wildlife corridors and wetland restoration and conservation planning. But the theme I want to use right now is that small is also beautiful, and pick out 3 smaller proposals in the May revise I want to make sure you hear about. So the first one has beaver advocates around the globe rejoicing over the weekend because they realized on Friday that the governor proposes in the May revise $1.44 million to our department and 5 permanent positions to create our first ever beaver restoration program within the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. It's been a long time coming. I heard the bells of happiness ringing in the beaver restoration community all weekend long. So that's the first small is also beautiful proposal. A second one within the May revise is specifically for our Lake Tahoe wildlife response management. Most folks know that the Tahoe Basin contains one of the largest populations of black bears in all of North America. At the same time, it's a global tourist destination, bringing millions into the basin. And human wildlife conflicts are challenging, to say the least. So there's a second proposal for $2.2 million into our team that works in the basin to increase their ability to do radio collars, bear boxes with certain communities, equipment like genetic analysis, the person and equipment capacity to manage that issue. And then lastly, an item that's been on my mind for several years is there's also a proposal of 3.31 million, kind of in a partnership with rangers at the state parks, to purchase in-car camera systems for our wildlife officers. In the day and age where law enforcement, use of force, accountability, transparency are increasingly important, I'm super pleased our wildlife officer force of almost 500 officers is moving this direction to cameras in all patrol vehicles. So the May revise total proposes an additional $280 million to our department. And if you think about the January 10 proposal, spring finance and May revise, fiscal year 22-23 for our department would mean a budget of $949 million, which I'm absolutely certain is the largest budget ever proposed for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and would add to our department an additional 92 staff, 78 permanent positions and 14 limited term. So we've got small is definitely beautiful, and we've got large. I look forward to questions. And let me turn it over to my friend, our great State Parks Director, Armando Quintero.
Thank you so much, Chuck. Oh, here we go. There we go. Chuck, thank you so very much. And I'm extraordinarily excited to announce that we are now evaluating Dos Rios Ranch Preserve as the newest California state park. And this is an area that sits right at the confluence of the Tuolumne River and the San Joaquin River. It's a 2,100 acre area that for some years has been getting restored by river partners, and they've put a tremendous investment in that area. And it really is an extraordinary piece of Central Valley landscape with mature valley oaks, with restored riparian woodlands that are now going to have sycamores and a number of other trees that are going to create an extraordinary park-like setting, well, a park setting. And what's really wonderful about this is just 20 minutes west of Modesto. So it really provides equitable access to Californians to an area that truly is gorgeous. It's a place that can provide heat refugia during heat events. And right across the San Joaquin River from this area, there's a large wildlife preserve. And for the visiting public, there are true rivers where they'll be able to go swimming, go fishing, go paddleboarding, kayaking, and really experience some extraordinary wildlife observation. And one of the things that I want to mention is that the process of creating a new state park isn't one that we can do on our own. And it's critical that we engage with the communities and we build these parks with them. So we're opening the door now to start this process. And once this property is acquired and the long-term planning efforts have been initiated, there'll be a variety of ways for the public to get involved. And typical opportunities will include participation in public and stakeholder workshops and meetings, submission of written comments, and additionally, we'll be creating a website which will allow the public to stay informed and be able to participate in describing how they'd like to see this unique property developed for all Californians. So we're extraordinarily excited about the potential of this acquisition. And something that's also important is the May revise funding for this isn't for the purchase of the property, it's actually to fund the planning and hopefully some of the early investments that will be made for amenities for the public to be able to visit this extraordinary area. The other big piece that we are seeing in terms of support for state parks is funding to promote equitable access to state parks. And this administration is really showing their commitment to advancing safe, equitable, and enjoyable access to parks, open spaces, natural resources, and the recreational amenities of California for all Californians. And certainly during the COVID events of the last 2 years, we have seen tremendous pressure on the existing parks. And so we've got funding for several programs that are really quite exciting. And the May revision includes $83.5 million that's focused on increasing equitable access. And I'll mention some of the programs that will be covered by some of this investment. For the K-12 interpretive programs, we are bringing in $15 million of one-time general funds for outdoor environmental education and access programming through the expansion of existing K-12 programs. And these programs will support outdoor environmental education for primarily underserved youth statewide. And there also is going to be a $40 million one-time general fund for the construction of a new visitor center and other interpretive enhancements at Colonel Allensworth State Park. And this new visitor center will better tell the story of this historic African-American community and will really cover the contributions of the founders and its members. And also it'll be a place where citizens can gather and celebrate the histories of Black Americans in California and certainly in Allensworth. There's also a $15 million proposal of one-time general fund investments for the Department of Parks and Recreation to partner with the California African American Museum to better tell the inclusive story of Black history across the state parks in California. And that too is an extraordinary and exciting partnership that we look forward to expanding. We opened up a program recently called the California State Library Partnership Program, or Library Pass, Parks Pass, and we are getting an infusion of $13.5 million of one-time general funds to expand this pilot program. As soon as we announced the program, it turned out that the waiting list for all of these park passes just went through the roof. So with the support of the governor's office, we're looking to expand the number of passes that folks can check out at their local libraries. And we really are looking to do a much better job of serving the citizenry in California across all the state parks in California. And with that, I'd like to introduce my friend, Director David Shabazian with the Department of Conservation. Thank you.
Thank you, Armando. I'm really happy to be here today to talk about a couple of budget items that we find particularly exciting. First, it's really working on supporting regional actions for nature-based solutions, which, as we know, are really important for helping California combat climate change. And my team and I have been out over the last few months meeting with stakeholders across California to really listen to these local leaders about what are their challenges, but also what are their opportunities, and really starting to dig in with them about their ideas about how to address those challenges, but also to really stand up those opportunities. And so we've been learning a lot and seeing room for stronger partnerships going forward, and where there is opportunity for bringing more resources into those regions to really help them advance the nature-based solutions that we're seeking across California. And so we look forward to bringing even more resources into those local planning and implementation efforts. And in that spirit, the governor's proposed budget adds $20 million that will support local land managers who are implementing climate smart strategies. And we will do that through helping with capacity building, training where that's needed, and also technical assistance, trying to bring in these tools and this data and other information to really help these regions start thinking more strategically about how they're going to really tackle those challenges and those opportunities. So that's one component that is really important to us in this budget, and we think has a lot of opportunity. And then as well, related to that is another effort that has already gotten started, and it's really, again, working with locally led efforts to help us see a future where those nature-based solutions are really tackling those climate issues. And so in the proposed budget, there's also $60 million in block grants that will help regions recharge their groundwater and transition agricultural lands into other uses that benefit those regions throughout the state. So this is a land repurposing effort. And it's really important because it recognizes that simply leaving this land fallow when there isn't adequate water supplies or they're just limited is really not good for the environment or the economy within these regions and these communities. And so what we're trying to do is find ways to invest in repurposing that really enables these regions to find other productive uses that benefit those communities and help achieve other really important objectives and uses of these lands to really work toward these natural and working land solutions that we're standing up in this budget. It also expands on the $50 million grant program that the Department of Conservation is working on now. And we hope to have some news out to our recipients in the next few days. The program is already oversubscribed. We had 14 applications, and that was worth about $111 million. So we will be able to fund about half of that ask in this 1 year. So clearly there are a lot more opportunities and a lot more regions where we can continue to deploy this program and work with local stakeholders to really envision their future and then help them stand that up. So these are just two examples of really working at that local level and using land use solutions to implement the governor's vision for nature-based solutions that will help the state be more climate resilient and sustainable. So I'm looking forward to doing that. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bruce Sato. He's your director of the California Conservation Corps.
Thank you, Director Shabazian. Bruce Saito here, California Conservation Corps. I'm very pleased to share with you that there is $52 million to the California Conservation Corps to implement a nature-based solution projects. That $52 million will fund or support the 14 local conservation corps, as well as help to develop 4 new tribal corps in the state of California. Now, what are those kind of nature-based solution kind of project work? It'll include, but not be limited to, habitat restoration and rehabilitation of wetlands, streams, and rivers, tree planting, urban greening, healthy forests, and forest recovery work throughout the state of California. You know, and this nature-based solution program is built in the motto, or built around the motto of the CCC, and that is where we provide work experience and service opportunities for young adults as they in turn provide enhancements of our natural resources, and in this case, nature-based solution projects. The nature-based solution program will produce more than 500,000 hours of nature-based solution restoration project work in the state of California. And more importantly, there will be more than 588 corps members, mostly BIPOC corps members, young adults, will be exposed to natural work in the natural resource land management agencies and industry. And our goal is that the majority, if not all of those young folks that gain this valuable experience working on nature-based solution projects will pursue a career, not just at a state level, but at a federal or even local level in these kinds of endeavors. And that will, I believe, go a long way in supporting the vision of this governor to have a California for all. With that, I'll pass to Secretary Crowfoot, I think, for our question and answer period.
Well, thanks so much, Bruce, and thanks to everybody for sharing highlights of the budget. Tough to do in just a few minutes. You all have complicated budgets, but I think it's helpful to just bring to the top of mind some of the things we're most excited about. Just a reminder for those of you who have questions, if you want, you can ask them in the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. Also, if you check out your chat, my colleague Andrea has shared links to deeper dives in the areas of climate, energy, and water that took place on Friday and are recorded. Worth noting, as David Hochschild from the Energy Commission said, this is truly a historic budget on all things related to climate action. We calculate upwards of over $35 billion proposed in coming years between last year's budget and this year's proposed budget. Just a little bit on process from here before we jump into questions. This budget that we've outlined is a proposal. As I said, the governor initiates the proposal in January, refines the proposal in May, which he did on Friday, and now the legislative leaders are actively considering that proposal. So there will be hearings taking place starting this week, and that conversation will typically occur through June. So if there are items that you're particularly interested in and want to make your voice heard, there's certainly a dialogue happening in the legislature right now. Okay, we're going to do a round robin. and answer some questions. And Chuck, I know you answered one question that our colleague Alex had already asked, but bears and Tahoe and bears in the Sierra Nevada. Alex asked, would Fish and Wildlife consider extending human wildlife conflict funding to include adjacent counties to Tahoe that are also being hammered by bear-human conflict?
Yeah, I think the specific was whether Alpine County is on our mind, and absolutely yes. We'd welcome any conversation with Alpine County on this issue.
Great, thanks so much. Question for Bruce. Elizabeth asked, thanks for the webinar. For the Conservation Corps, have the tribal core locations been determined? Would be curious to hear more about this. And if you haven't, how would you identify where that'll take place?
The CCC and local corps have a number of relationships with the tribes throughout California. So we'll work with Geneva E.B. Thompson and the Tribal Bureau to outreach to all the tribes and work to develop those tribal corps. But at this point, there are no established tribal corps programs. But it's we're going to do that quickly, and we're going to do that. We're going to have a lot of fun doing that.
Hey, thanks, Bruce. Yeah, and great to point out that our tribal proposals are really formed through so many government-to-government consultations between state government and tribal governments that have taken place in recent months. And our first ever Assistant Secretary for Tribal Affairs, Geneva E.B. Thompson, has been driving or leading those consultations. And so as Bruce points out, as we're building out or to build out the Tribal Corps, Conservation Corps will of course be continuing to rely on those consultations and collaborations. Okay, question from a couple people, Natalie and Christian, about Lithium Valley. So this would probably be one for David Hochschild. So as I understand it, there's this incredible source of lithium that's been identified in the Salton Sea region of the state. And both of these folks ask if actually local communities will benefit from this activity, and specifically will funding be allocated to actually address the Salton Sea challenge, that is the shrinking lake bed in the Salton Sea.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. That is 100% our commitment, is to ensure that there will be revenues from the lithium production that are dedicated both to the restoration of the Salton Sea and to other community priorities there through the local governments. And so that is part of the proposal, is to essentially have a royalty fee or revenue attached to lithium production. I will also say a little bit about the lithium production itself. So today, in the lithium ion batteries in our vehicles and our phones and our laptops, almost 99% of that is imported from China, Australia, Chile, and Argentina. That's where the vast majority of lithium comes from. In China and Australia, it's hard rock mining. In Chile and Argentina, it's these massive evaporation ponds. The lithium resource in California is by far the greenest way to produce lithium that exists. It's in the superheated geothermal brine, and it's a very, very light footprint process. So that's one of the things that's attractive about it to us, is that this can be done in a way that has a very, very light footprint and works in concert with the existing geothermal resources there.
Thanks so much, David. Question for the other David Shabazian, who leads our Department of Conservation, from Vicky. If some of our agricultural lands are being quote unquote repurposed for other uses, can some be available as wildlife corridors or additional refuges to enhance biodiversity and address the biodiversity crisis we face? David, can you talk a little bit more about the land repurposing and if there's potential to use repurposed land for habitat?
That's certainly one of the uses that we may see out there. This is really a ground up effort. And so it's really up to what the local jurisdictions and collection of jurisdictions and stakeholders want to do with their land and the vision that they have for that land. But certainly we see that, rewilding and particularly for habitat purposes is one of those uses that will be on the table. And, we're looking forward to seeing, the proposals that are coming in and which ones will have that sort of use built into their strategy going forward on how to use those lands.
Yeah, thanks so much. question from Natalie. There's $23 million investment in drought food assistance. How exactly will that assistance work and be distributed? Now, Chuck and Carla are key partners in all things drought response. And Chuck, I'm looking at you because you're on screen. I believe that the funding for drought food assistance would go through our Department of Social Services, which is one of our department in our sister agency at Health and Human Services. And so I think they would be setting up the funding program, but help me correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, and in, I'm sure, strong coordination with our California Department of Food and Ag and Secretary Ross, who's kind of present across a lot of the communities at the rural landscape, truly appreciating how devastating the coming drought will be on our farming communities.
Yeah. So Scott raises a question on wildfire and wildfire resilience, and he brings up a 2018 memorandum of understanding between our state government and the U.S. Forest Service, where we called for achieving 1 million acres of wildfire resilience projects every year starting in 2025. And he notes that, frankly, we're not there yet. And what is it going to take to actually get there? Chief Tyler, I'll take a first crack at this because, as you know, I'm really quite engaged in wildfire resilience, and then ask you to elaborate. So Scott's absolutely right. We have a target to manage 1 million acres of land for wildfire resilience, which is not an end point, but it is a milestone in getting much more proactive on upfront proactive solutions like prescribed fire, like ecologically based forest management. And so to scale up our activities in this area, have to give a ton of credit to the governor and the legislature, who last year allocated a record amount of funding for wildfire resilience projects. Our principle is to really get funding to regions across the state and allow regional leaders, be they resource conservation districts or counties or fire safe councils, to help identify what the priority projects are. And in fact, that was such a priority for the legislature and governor. They allocated over $500 million about 3 months early last year in April, which was an emergency allocation. And really glad to identify that the funding that was approved by the legislature governor last year has already resulted in about over 500 wildfire resilience projects underway, some which are completed, many which are underway across the state to build our wildfire resilience. We also have a task force called our Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force, which is focused on implementing 99 very specific measurable actions to build wildfire resilience. One of those is a prescribed fire strategy, where we're now holding ourselves accountable for vastly scaling up safe, managed prescribed fire across the state. So I would very much characterize this as a work in progress. We have more resources and more focus than we ever have, but we recognize we have a long way to go to truly get our hands around this catastrophic wildfire crisis and bring wildfire back to its sort of natural ecological cycle. Joe, turn it to you for anything you want to add.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. So you, in fact, hit on many of the same topics, but I think it's important at the same time to recognize the investment in community wildfire preparedness and mitigation, working with our partners at Cal OES for grant opportunities, home hardening, defensible space, amber resistant zones around homes to move forward. And we recognize also our federal partners are bringing forward their 10-year wildfire crisis strategy, that both the state is working closely with our federal partners to be able to work together to address those issues. Right now, I'm sitting in the Vallejo area in a vehicle. I'll be walking in when this meeting is over to meet with Jen Everline, the Regional Forester, Region 5, to talk about ways in which we can collaborate and continue to do better together. Certainly, she is a co-chair with Secretary Crowfoot on that task force he described, and we are all committed to changing the climate forest resilience environment in California.
Hey, great. Thanks, Joe. Question for you, Chuck, coming in, sorry, I'm trying to track all of these. There was just a question about the applicability of funding for wildlife programs in the Klamath.
Yes. It's also another.
Are funds for the Pacific Flyway available for the Klamath Basin, Dale asks?
Yes, and Also, don't forget, in addition to the May revise line items, back in January of this year, the governor proposed an initial tranche of money to our department. I think it's $75 million total. That is also a series of assets available potentially in the Klamath. And coming out of last year, the budget we're in now, we actually used some of last year's proposal to do things on Lower Tule in partnership for the flyway there.
That's really helpful. Kim asked a question just back to Lithium Valley. She's read everything and looked for all the BCPs and trailer bill proposals, but can't seem to find the budget change proposal specifically for Lithium Valley. So I'm going to ask my colleague Andrea to work with the folks that are monitoring this and see if you can put the link to the Lithium Valley BCP or explanation in the chat. That would be really helpful. I want to note that a lot of colleagues have joined us who are scientists in our agency, and they're giving voice to concerns around salary and compensation for their work. And I'll just want to be open that want to hear your input that you've been making, in the Q&A, but also more broadly across the social media. Many may know that our Cal HR, our state's HR entity, takes the lead for negotiating contracts with our various bargaining units. And so we don't have a central role in that at agency, but I've been very clear internally and externally that our state scientists are a critical part of our work. And frankly, our science has never been more important to the work that we do across our agency and across our state. So huge thanks for the work that you do, and know that you've got somebody in me in my role that is working to elevate just how important having talented scientists who can stay in their positions in state government throughout their careers is to the work we now do, given the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis and the crisis of inequity across our state. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Okay, question on our extreme heat effort. Alejandra identifies that she's looked at the fact sheet and the investment of $800 million to cool schools and neighborhoods, including projects to reduce urban overheating. She says, great and much needed investment. Can you clarify which grant programs will this fund and over how many years? That's a good detailed question. And Andrea, I'm going to ask you to also, I'm giving you a lot of tasks here in the chat, but if you can put in the chat a link to the chart in the budget that shows where funding is going. I know, Alejandra, that a significant portion of that funding is going to be allocated through Governor's Office of Planning and Research, or OPR, specifically to support resilience centers. These are community design, community shaped resilience centers that are going to support our most vulnerable communities through extreme heat and other climate driven challenges. We also have $50 million for the first of its kind urban, or I should say green schoolyards project, which will be allocated to our agency, and we'll stand up a program probably between us or CAL FIRE and the urban forestry entity. David Hochschild, can you just talk a little bit about the work happening on buildings and cooling, which is really exciting? I think it technically falls in the energy bucket of funding, but it's obviously really helpful for our extreme heat challenge.
Yeah, so we have $1 billion in the budget for building decarbonization and building electrification, which includes electric heat pump technology to cool homes. And our focus there is an equity first focus. So we're really prioritizing low income and disadvantaged communities for those incentives. And so that includes cooling technology that is sustainable and all electric and not powered by natural gas.
Thanks so much. David Shabazian at Department of Conservation. Ryan asked a question around land repurposing can provide funds for groundwater recharge. Just Ryan's interested, how could recharge be a part of the program, that land repurposing? And then Carla Namath from DWR had to drop off, but he references DWR and says, hey, will DWR funds and the DOC funds, Department of Conservation funds, work together? So how are we advancing groundwater recharge? I can answer a little bit on behalf of Carla, but why don't I turn it over to you first?
Sure, thank you. Thanks for the question. So that's a good example of one of the many uses of land that we envisioned in this, that this program will help regions figure out for their strategy going forward. And it does dovetail nicely with implementation of Sigma, where you can use, more strategically use this funding to identify lands that have been identified in a groundwater sustainability plan and build that into a larger region-wide land use effort where this knits into it. So, recharge being one of the uses that can be implemented going forward with this funding. And then also finding opportunities where you can get maybe 2 or 3 benefits out of a piece of land where maybe you're rewilding that, but also then using it as an area where you can flood it occasionally when you have that surface water and use it as a basin where you can get that water back down into the aquifer. And so this is a way that we see this program really helping these regions think through these strategies of land use and where they can get double duty or maybe more out of those lands for the purposes that we're trying to stand up in the nature-based solutions.
Thanks, David. And I would just say, Carla, I think if she were on from Water Resources would point out there's a lot of funding that's going into implementation of our Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and specifically to groundwater management agencies. And an eligible use of that funding is very much recharge projects. They also have funding for small water systems across the state, and that can also be spent on recharge projects. So I think for those communities that are interested in recharging their groundwater basins, there's a lot of funding that needs to work together within this proposed budget. David Hochschild, back to you. Help us understand what this carbon removal is. I think, there's a conversation around carbon capture and utilization, which is, I think, engineered ways to get carbon underground. And then there's carbon removal, which I think is a little different. But can you help us understand what we're talking about?
So this is, just to be crystal clear, this is totally separate from capturing emissions at, fossil fuel sites, for example. These are standalone systems. Just as an example, so the largest project in the world that's doing this is by a Swiss company called Climeworks. And what they're doing, the way to think about it, it's the opposite of fracking. So what they're doing, they're sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere, and then they have a process using geothermal heat that mineralizes that CO2 into rock. So it's permanently inert and it's stored underground. And so we have $100 million in the budget over 2 years to advance technologies like this. There's actually quite a bit of innovation happening in California around this space right now. Probably, I'd say about half of the innovation nationally in this technology area is in California, companies like Mosaic Materials and others. And so that's what this is going to go for.
Thanks so much. Chuck, over to you. Mario asks, this whole question on Joshua tree, which I know is a big question around whether it's protected as a state endangered species. He says, will the state support fund local jurisdictions in protecting the Joshua tree and other natural resources that are important to local communities? So this could be some of that conversation around nature-based solutions, Wildlife Conservation Board, but.
Yeah, kind of. So Mario, look, make assumptions at your own risk as this plays out through the regulatory process. But there is an important $36 million in the nature-based solutions for what's called Natural Community Conservation Planning Program. So that's the state's program housed within our department to do regional conservation planning, to design conservation networks for covered and important species. There are about 13 of them, maybe 17 of them in the state right now. They're often done in parallel with our federal counterparts. They call them habitat conservation plans. And kind of in theory, they're broad zoning plans that allow conservation priorities within a region that in turn then expedites and streamlines, permitting for infrastructure, hospitals, and other things. We started about 2 years ago suggesting to San Bernardino County, it might want to consider doing something like that against the backdrop of Western Joshua Tree kind of long-term conservation.
That's really helpful. A couple questions coming in on our 30 by 30, which is our target to conserve 30% of California's land and coastal waters by 2030. Terry asks, how much funding is budgeted for 30 by 30? And Terry's interested in potentially open space lands at the Sonoma Development Center. I would say, Terry, it's we didn't create sort of a pot of funding called 30 by 30, but we're certainly talking about several $100 million that in this proposed budget that will advance 30 by 30. The recently finalized strategy has 10 pathways to achieve 30 by 30, like acquisitions and conservation easements, improved conservation on public lands, and significant amounts of funding in the nature-based solutions. Part of our proposed budget will advance this. We don't think this is the total amount of funding to achieve 30 by 30, but we think it's a really important down payment. And then somebody else asks, is there funding, Pamela, is there funding dedicated to managing, monitoring, and enforcing preserved or conserved lands? And I would say, and probably Chuck would say, there is some funding through our existing programs in that, but frankly, that continues to be an area of improvement to make over time. So once we conserve these lands, we're ensuring their stewardship. And Armando, as we get to the end of our discussion here today, I want to give you a tough question, but it's one of the best and doesn't relate to state parks, but you're a creative guy. And that is, Emily asks, as someone looking to enter the field, what are your recommendations to figure out what part of the climate change challenge I want to help with? Very interested in advocating for underserved communities. So how would you sort of what insight would you provide an inspiring leader like this?
I think the value of new vision in the work that we are all doing together and with the public really has a space for people who can really identify the multiple benefits of the actions that we're all taking. I mean, when I listen to the projects that everyone is talking about, I actually am hearing climate change impacts in some of the decisions that are being made and the projects that are being laid out. And I do think that young people coming in and being empowered to really articulate what they see without being shaped immediately into what they should see can really provide some interesting conversations and opportunities. And I'll give just a couple of quick examples. The new Dos Rios property, which we are going to be evaluating, includes 1,500 acres that long ago was cut off from floodwaters by levees. As we move toward evaluating this place as a park, we're going to remove that levee and basically return 1,500 acres of groundwater recharge land within a state park. And so I think that the lands that we're all managing really offers the opportunity for our departments to work as sister departments together in looking at how we support each other and really start looking at entire watersheds, looking at entire systems. And I think of it as in terms of thinking about metaphorically or in sometimes actually removing the fences that separate us in the way we manage the resources that we're all charged with taking care of.
That's really helpful. And I would just give a pragmatic piece of advice, which is there are remarkable community-based organizations that are really driving this movement around equitable climate action. And so I'd suggest Emily or others that are looking to do this work to, look around their communities or their region and identify those community-based organizations that share your values. And we're working in state government to fund those organizations and build the voice, build the vision of the most vulnerable communities to climate change across California. I think that'd be a really great place to start too. Folks, this has been a really informative hour. I hope. We didn't get to everyone's questions, but we got to a whole lot of them. There's certainly more information in all of the links that Andrea has provided. I'll end with a thank you. A lot of what we talk about and what we get to announce in state government is the result of advocacy. It's the result of experimentation, pilots, models that you all have built across the state. So huge thanks for the work that you do. And I look forward to continuing to make progress. We obviously live in challenging times with climate change and biodiversity loss and inequities, but I can tell you under Governor Newsom, we are committed to making a difference and showing the world how we combat these efforts. And in partnership with you, we'll do just that. Thanks once again for joining, and we'll see you again soon.